The spring of 1836 was the mountaintop for these people in Kirtland. They were soon headed into a valley. They had opened a bank which was not chartered or recognized by the state legislature. And soon, local newspapers ran articles saying that anybody who even accepted one of the banknotes from Kirtland could be subject to a $1,000 fine for illegal banking. That's at a time when a farmer and their family might make $400 in a year. And so fairly quickly that bank fails, resulting in lots of lawsuits and lots of dissent. Many of these people start packing up and heading to Missouri. Over 500 left in one day with what they called Kirtland Camp. Soon though, they lease the temple to the Western Reserve Teacher Seminary and Kirtland Institute, a teacher's training school. It's a 5-year lease, but they moved out after a year, complaining that there were too many steps in the temple and it was too hard to heat. Very quickly though, the church is growing again in Kirtland. Church leaders here realized that they could find English converts gathering to Nauvoo and convince them to stop short. So by 1842 and 43, there's perhaps 500 members here again, worshiping in the temple and living in some of the beautiful homes that had been left behind. That is causing significant problems in Nauvoo, though, because that land is purchased on credit. And the only way they have to pay for it is to resell it to the gathering converts. So if they're stopping in Kirtland, they're not buying in Nauvoo. There's a lot of pressure on members and leaders here to support the gathering to Nauvoo, and they do. So by 1844, you're back down to about 100 members here. Joseph Smith is assassinated June 27 of 44, and soon the church branches out into lots of different varieties of Latter-day Saints, and the temple is a magnet drawing many of those groups back. At times people here are loyal to Brigham Young, at times Sidney Rigdon, at times James Strang, at times James Colin Brewster, at times Martin Harris, on and on. By the 1860s, some of the earliest members of the reorganization are worshiping here. And we in Community of Christ had a branch going here by the 1870s. That one didn't survive. The current branch dates to about 1886. So that is possession, but that is different than ownership. And ownership, even in the 1830s, was pretty messy. At times, Joseph Smith owned the land the temple sits on personally, and at times he owns it in behalf of the church. And there are occasions where people in the 1830s are selling the land the temple sits on before there's any record that they owned that land. But it does seem that at Joseph's death, the temple is back with him as trustee for the church. What that means, though, is that the various groups that are starting to come out of Nauvoo start to try and strengthen their claim by attempting to gain some kind of a deed or color of title. And so the 12 asked William Marks, who had the temple in his name in 1837, he'd been the stake president here, to sign the temple over to them. Unfortunately, Marks really, though, had nothing to sign over because he had given his claim back to Joseph prior to Joseph's death. There is a sale on the courthouse steps in the early 1860s. The temple and 13 acres sell for $150. The guy who buys it sells just the temple to Joseph Smith III and Mark Forskett. So Russell Huntley is that in between. He sells it to Joseph Smith III and Mark Forskett, who were leaders in the reorganization. They initially had hoped to sell it to the city of Kirtland for a town hall, but the township here is nervous that they might not have clear title. And so leaders in the reorganization eventually decide that identity is really more important to them than anything else, and they put together a lawsuit related to temple ownership. It's called the Kirtland Temple suit. Happens in 1879. The ruling is 1880. The judge said great things for the reorganization, like the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is Joseph Smith Jr.'s church and entitled to the property thereof. But he also noted in his final paragraph that we filed the case wrong and he dismissed it. So it was as if it really didn't happen from a legal perspective. But at that point, Joseph III conveyed possession of the temple to his church, and their cloudy ownership ripened into clear ownership as early as 1881 or as late as 1901, depending on how conservative the attorney is. We did a lot of restoration work on the temple in the 1880s, hoping to make it look just as it did. And again, the Kirtland congregation gets going in the 1880s. They worship here regularly into the 1950s, and were at that point invited to move across the street. They come back to the temple for Christmas and Easter and Thanksgiving. It's most often, though, used for pilgrimages. We invite all kinds of people who share this heritage to come back for worship services and classes. So about once a week, there's an activity here in the temple. It has been my privilege to share the story of Kirtland Temple with you. Thank you very much for that opportunity.